a quick note to anyone who has not yet seen Nosferatu 2024, spoilers.
Many spoilers.
We're going to be talking about it in depth with the assumption that you either have seen it or don't care knowing what happens. Just a heads up.
Or to see it with your own two eyes, which honestly might be the right decision if you were to ask me.
Oh, that's harsh.
I didn't like hate it or anything, but it definitely like it was over and I was like, well, I don't ever need to watch it again.
I already want to watch it again, but that's
like
more of an
for
academic
reasons?
impulse.
Okay.
Yeah.
Books.
Hello and welcome to Didn't Read It, the podcast that wants to know why you killed those beautiful flowers.
And also, why are we as a society so horny for vampires?
I have a good answer for that one, actually. But I am your host, Grace Todd. And with me this week is bestie of the pod, Maddie Wood.
Hello.
Hi, babe.
Hi.
How you doing?
I am just, like I said, like America, so horny to talk about these vamp tales. To get really deep into the weeds of weird vampire lore.
Would you like to introduce yourself and or our topic for today?
Well, as listeners know, or don't, I don't know, that made me seem like I think that I'm very important to this podcast. Listeners, you don't know.
You are load bearing in this podcast.
I've been on it a lot.
You are our co-producer and social media maven, and as well as
that's true.
Beloved return guest.
It's me. I'm here. And we're going to talk a couple things. We're sort of blending. We're doing a bit of a blend today. We're going to touch on Dracula, the seminal vampire piece in literature. And then also some fun movie tie-ins.
Yeah.
Yeah. Both a silent film version from the 20s and a current Best Picture nominee.
Yeah.
Here in 2025.
The Nosferatus.
The Nosferati.
1922 and 2024.
Yes. And I'm very excited.
I am also excited. It's been
I have a lot of thoughts.
I do too. It's been a journey. So I reread Dracula. I
don't think mental illness is a hell of a drug. I don't think I've read Dracula. And if I do not remember.
And then we both watched
the 1922 version and the 2024 version.
Yes.
Which ironically both state in the credits at some point that they're based on Dracula. Something tells me they're not really based on Dracula.
Yeah. So that is one of the most interesting elements here. So
is it just like, oh, a vampire equals Dracula? Like, is that how base we're at this point?
Nosferatu 2024 is a pretty close remake of Nosferatu 1922. Nosferatu 1922 is a very loose, unlicensed adaptation of Dracula.
Okay.
And there are some things that are changed about it that to me make it almost a completely different story in like really important ways. And I think Nosferatu 1922 is a lot more a product of the era it was made in and the men who made it than it is really an adaptation of Dracula. But it was considered enough of an adaptation of Dracula that the people who made the movie actually got sued by Bram Stoker's widow.
Oh, interesting.
And she won.
Oh, all right.
So there was a lawsuit that she emerged triumphant, and she, instead of like asking for money or for, you know, sort of compensation, she demanded that the movie be completely destroyed.
Oh, sorry, Bram Stoker's widow. That did not happen.
Well, so, and this is one of the things, when you and I were gearing up for this, I text you asking which version you had seen. There are a bunch of different versions of the 1922 Nosferatu because it sort of went underground.
Ah, so maybe did they publicly destroy one, but there were like director's cuts and all kinds of things that people just sort of held on to?
They were ordered to destroy it, but they were never told to provide any proof that it was destroyed.
Loophole.
The studio that made it went under. It collapsed.
As a result of the lawsuit?
Correct.
Okay.
And it only ever made this one film.
Wow, okay.
And it's not entirely clear how this happened, but after...
Proof that being litigious pays off.
Well, kind of, because despite the fact that she managed to collapse this nascent film studio, prints of the movie started circulating in other countries almost immediately. And
Okay.
it was all happening very much underground. And so there were versions of it floating around that had different intertitles and text cards. And some of them had been like edited to give it a happy ending. Some of them.
Oh.
Yeah. Like,
Really rogue.
yeah. So there are a bunch of different versions. But
The one I watched did not have a happy ending.
no.
Well, I will
and it's
say,
not supposed to.
This is interesting. I found that the 1922 version, when I watched it, felt like kind of an ambiguous ending. Like, it was not immediately clear to me that she was dead.
Yeah.
Whereas end of 2024,
She did.
she's so dead.
Spoilers.
Spoiler alert. She did.
She dead as hell. But in the 1980s, a group of Italian academics tracked down the original scripts of Nosferatu 1922 and multiple surviving prints of the film and cut them all back together into what is pretty reliably like the version that they intended to release in 1922.
And so, did she, from a timeline perspective, did she sue them before it ever released in the United States, or did it release and it was popular and she was like, hold on?
So it was not an American movie.
Oh,
It was
oh, right, that makes sense.
German movie.
Yes.
So it was a product of the Weimar period.
Yes, a delightful short time in the history of the Germanic Empire.
Yes, and we're going to talk about how it's very specifically a product of the Weimar Republic.
Which is what, it's like post World War I to World War II?
Yeah,
It's like the 1918 through 1930 something, maybe?
In 1918, the Kaiser was forced to step down and a republic was formed. And that lasted until essentially the Nazis
The
came
rise
to
of
power.
Hitler. Yeah, okay.
It was a very messy period. It was a period where it was obvious to everyone that things were going to change, but in what way and where they would end and what the country would look like after all the change had happened was really up for grabs.
Wow, really apropos.
Uh-huh.
Yikes. Yikeroonies.
And so she found out about it. Somebody sent her, I think, an advertisement for it. And she was like, well, I certainly didn't give this my blessing.
And were they promoting it as an adaptation of Dracula?
Yeah, they weren't being very coy about it.
Okay. Because the version I watched, it's mentioned in the intro title cards as inspired by, or I don't remember the exact language, but it definitely stated, it said Dracula by Bram Stoker.
Yeah,
Who died in what year?
Oh, gosh.
I'm only curious as far as was his widow old at this point?
She was in her 60s.
Okay.
He died in 1912.
Okay, so not too long dead. What
No.
year did the book come out?
Dracula came out in 1897.
Okay. So long enough to be part of the cultural discourse for a generation.
Yes. And so one of the things that's so interesting about this sort of stack of adaptations is you have a 2024 film coming out in the wake of COVID the sort of rising influence and power of the far right, the continued Nazification of the internet, all of that, which is adapting a movie that came out in the wake of World War I, which also was followed by pestilence.
Yes.
Right?
And the Nazification of...
Well, no, we're not at the Nazification yet. Right?
That's true. 1922, we would not be there yet.
We are not. It is so hard. We've done this on the show before. It is so hard not to retroactively project World War II onto the interwar period. It's very important to remember that they do not know what is going to come yet.
Very fair.
We are at the peak of the Weimar Republic. Things are messy. There is out of control inflation. You've got people on the far left and the far right fighting each other in the streets. Primarily, you've got the far right antagonizing people because you are operating sort of under... So we talked about this a little bit in the Susan Glaspell episode, that you've got all these people who are like leftists and creatives and intellectuals who are trying very hard to make strides for their respective countries. But the ruling class is very much operating under the shadow of the Bolshevik Revolution. And so you've got a still very powerful, still very wealthy ruling class in Weimar Germany who are terrified of the specter of communism. And they are trying very hard to kind of lock down on leftist gains, which is where you get the conflict that's happening in this period. But at the same time, the Weimar Republic was in many ways as open and equal a place as Germany had ever been, right?
Yes. I have a great-great-grandfather who was a famous German painter at this time, German impressionist, named Ernst Kirchner.
That's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, so he would have been hanging out with these guys, probably.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. There's some of his stuff at the VMFA.
Oh, that's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you've got the 2024 adaptation of this 1922 film that is very much a byproduct of World War I and the ensuing sort of mingled fear and hope, because everyone can tell that change is coming, but there's no way to know yet sort of where it's going to fall, which is an adaptation of a novel that is really written at the absolute like height of the British Empire and is very much just like, you know what's great? The British Empire.
In case you were wondering.
Like, Dracula the novel is very like forward looking. It's very preoccupied with like new technological innovations and like how great it is to be in the British Empire and like how awesome Americans are. And like we British and Americans are just so fucking great and we're going to triumph over adversity and it's all going to go up from here.
And then let's make a movie. Not that.
It's a really interesting kind of net of influences and attitudes and baggage, shall we say, that filters all the way back to the movie that just came out, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so sort of starting with, or jumping off from Dracula itself, Nosferatu 1922 amounts to a loose adaptation of sort of the first half of the novel.
Okay.
So Dracula the novel kind of falls into two fairly discrete halves. You've got the first half, which is about Jonathan Harker going to Dracula's castle, and before he can return, Dracula comes to England and is preying on Lucy, while Jonathan Harker's wife, Mina, is sort of off stage nursing Jonathan back to health. Jonathan and Mina kind of know what's going on. The people around the men who are all in love with Lucy. The novel opens with Lucy receiving 3 proposals in one day.
Oh.
from the three men who are going to be our sort of main protagonists.
Okay.
You've got the doctor, Seward. Mm-hmm. You've got Quincy, the American. Pew pew
Pew pew.
He's like a gunslinging Western.
Hell yeah. Now I'm like, I guess I have to read Dracula. This sounds awesome.
Dracula slaps, by the way. Dracula is a genuinely very fun read. And then you have her actual fiance, whose name I am blanking on right at this very moment, who is like an English lord.
Okay.
And then Van Helsing shows up on the scene. And so you've got the kind of four of them. Van Helsing, the Dutch, eccentric genius, Dr. Seward, the medical man, the gunslinging American, and then this sort of scion of English nobility.
Okay.
And they all just love Lucy so much.
Okay.
And it's very funny because Bram Stoker was almost certainly, definitely a gay man, a deeply, deeply repressed gay man.
Sure.
He wrote some very interesting letters to Walt Whitman that I recommend you peruse if you are on the fence about his sexuality and also the level of repression he was operating from. But it is very funny because especially for the beginning of Lucy's illness as she's being preyed on by Dracula, it does read like, it reads as almost fan fiction levels of just like, and what if I was just a helpless little baby and the four nicest, handsomest men in the world loved me so much and they were so strong and so selfless and they just loved me and cherished me and gathered around my bed to save me by any means necessary? Wouldn't that be great?
I love this. I love this. So deeply different than the movie, which is what I assumed was happening while I was watching it, but...
Yeah. And so, ultimately, tragically, Lucy dies. But she dies after being preyed upon by Dracula for like a matter of... It's either weeks or months, and these men are desperately trying to figure out how to protect her. There are blood transfusions, which was like a brand new technology at the time that Bram Stoker clearly didn't understand super well, but it doesn't matter. Van Helsing is, we're getting the outlines of the Dracula myth and like what can and can't kill a vampire. But then in the novel, and again, this is where we get to the deeply repressed homosexuality, Lucy is turned into a vampire.
Oh, so she doesn't die.
She does not. I mean, she does.
Well, she does, but she is.
She dies and comes back as a vampire and is preying on the children of London. She is eating children by night.
Ooh.
And Van Helsing has to round up all of these dashing young men.
Oh, and they have to go kill the woman that they've all been obsessed with?
Correct.
Cool.
And it's very upsetting. Like it's honestly, it's a beautiful scene, but it's rough. And this is around when Mina comes back on the scene. And Mina is, unlike Lucy, who is kind of silly and fragile and like very curious about sex and sexuality and is, has all of these men who are in love with her. Mina is, even though she makes a lot of jokes that are meant to very much draw a line between her and the quote unquote like new woman. You know, the Victorian new woman idea? Mm-hmm. She very much is the new woman. She can write in shorthand and she is the one who like types up all of their notes and she's very calm in the face of danger. She's very put together and they all rally around protecting Mina for the second half of the novel. But in the second half, they actually pursue Dracula back to his castle and kill him there.
Okay.
So...
Aside from his initial going to Transylvania and then like being nursed back, is that the extent of John's role?
No, he comes back.
Okay.
Yeah, he and Mina both come back after Lucy has died.
Any thoughts on why they chose to change all of their names?
Unlicensed adaptation.
No. In between 1922 and 2024.
Well, they didn't change all of them. Or they didn't change their names from the Nosferatu version.
Yeah, his name is Thomas in the 2024.
So in the 2022, he doesn't have a first name. He's just Hutter.
No, he's Jonathan. She calls him Jonathan multiple times.
Oh, that was added after the fact. That was not in the original script.
Okay.
I read
now coming to learn, I did not watch an OG version, maybe.
Well, it might have been in the version I saw too, but there was a very withering aside in one of the film history articles I was reading that was like, as a concession to the American need for first names.
Oh, cutting.
He was given a name.
You Americans so obsessed with a full name.
In the original...
Of all the things we're obsessed with, that's probably the least problematic.
So in the original script, his name is just Hutter. We don't get his first name at all.
Interesting.
And so Nosferatu 1922 is essentially a rewrite of the first half, where Mina and Lucy are sort of combined into the same character. And as we know, it all, the real action all takes place and is concluded in this little German town.
Okay. Does the Renfield character exist in the book? His boss who sends him?
Yeah, so you're thinking of Renfield, who is in the novel, is implied, I can't remember if it's implied or overtly stated, to have been another lawyer, basically, who was driven mad / fell into the thrall of Dracula before Harker went over there. Harker's boss is actually a lovely person who does not knowingly send him into the jaws of hell.
Interesting.
And that is one of the big changes, that is one of the other big changes that Nosferatu makes, is it combines these two figures in a way that really emphasizes the extent to which these characters are all kind of trapped within these structures of power. So Canuck in the 1922 Nosferatu is Hutter's boss and is also the Renfield character and has been somehow in contact with Orlok and somehow by being in contact with him has been corrupted by him, is being controlled by him. And so you've got this hierarchy where Dracula is in control of Canuck, who is in control of Hutter, who is in control of Ellen, which is a change that I think really underlines some of the major influences on the 1922 adaptation.
That's interesting. To smush some of these characters into singles that aren't really, it seems, actually that closely related in actual character archetype is a weird choice.
Yeah, so it's really interesting to me that they lost the court case, because I think, and I don't know how hard they actually tried to defend themselves, but this feels to me much more like what we have now, where you get these kind of constant new iterations on these like classic monster stories, than it feels anything like an adaptation.
That's why my question to begin with was like, is it just like, oh, there's a vampire in it, so it must be Dracula? Like, is it more like a trope and less of an actual adaptation? Because...
Right. Well, and Bram Stoker wasn't even... Like, he didn't invent the vampire. Not really.
No.
There were other vampire... Like, it was already an existing...
Like, folklore.
Yes.
You probably popularized the vampire is probably a more fair...
I have a feeling that what happened was... So, again, right? Post-World War I, Germany is experiencing runaway inflation, in part because of the war debt that they are paying to England and America and France. They're being sued by a group that represents specifically British authors. When you think about the difference in their relative spending power, I think it was probably a foregone conclusion from the moment she decided to sue them that they were fucked.
Yeah, they were going to lose.
I did not have time to read into the court case much, so if that is incorrect, drop me a line. But that is my
That
best.
makes sense. Yeah, this is like the part that I was the most interested in learning more about, was how close did it track. And it sounds like if Dracula is a Sprite, Nosferatu's like a lime LaCroix. Yeah. Like so lightly inspired.
Completely different. I mean, the framework is still there. Nosferatu 1922 is made primarily by 3 men. 2 of them are World War I veterans.
Okay.
One of them is very into the occult. One of them is gay. One of them is Jewish.
Cool.
Right?
Love this little witchy trio.
So we've got the producer and set designer, and the man who like really is responsible. Like, producer and set designer almost undersells it. He is the one who is responsible really for how this movie looks, including like the character designs.
The Nosferatu that like became very famous visually.
Yes. So that was Albin Grau.
Oh, so it's his doing. I'm going to tell you that I like had to stop the movie and look at it and like rewind and look at it again because it made me laugh so hard. So there's a scene where Renfield, whatever his name is in the Canuck in the 1922 version, has the like letter from Count Orlok that he's like looking at, and they zoom in a couple times on the letter, and it literally reminded me like if you were like, hey, 4th grader, write down what you think occult things would look like.
So those are all real occult symbols.
I don't doubt that piece, but the like the childish scrawl of it, I was just like, what young person was like, I'm gonna put like a Satan's, a satanic sign and a pentagram, and I'm just gonna scribble all this stuff onto a sheet of paper and give it to this. Also, I don't know where the archetype began that like crazed older men have to have 0 hairs on the top of their head and crazy amounts of hair on the sides of their head.
Maybe it began with this movie.
Maybe, because
I don't know.
Holy moly, did they really lean into that? It's wild.
So Albin Grau was a World War I vet.
Is he the one who's into the occult?
Yes. So he was an architect, an artist. He ultimately fled to Switzerland during World War II. Had a pretty solid career. And then...
As a architect or as a filmmaker?
Architect, mostly,
okay.
I think. I don't know how many films he did other than this one. And then the young man who wrote the script, so the one who really, like, made a lot of these decisions about adapting Dracula, the novel, into Nosferatu, the script, was Heinrich Galeen, whose name I hope I am pronouncing correctly. I could not find verification about whether or not Galeen was a World War I vet.
Okay.
I'm kind of assuming he was.
I mean, given the place and the time and their general ages, and knowing that drafts were a thing, I would, unless he had some kind of dispensation, I would think yes, but...
Yeah, he's the only one who is not, like, expressly and explicitly a World War I veteran, but I am just assuming he was.
All right.
And he was Jewish, and
Okay.
he ultimately moved to the United States, I'm pretty sure,
Okay.
during World War II. So they all made it out.
Great.
And then finally, the director and, like, the, most famous, like...
Big name on the marquee.
Creative genius was F.W. Murnau. And he is fascinating. So he was also a World War I vet. And before the war, he met and fell in love with the love of his life, who was a Jewish poet who died during the war.
Sad.
And it was the great tragedy that kind of underpinned the rest of his adulthood.
And these guys are all German? Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, Austrian, some of them.
Okay.
And this is the sort of backstory. This is the environment in which this film is made, right? All of these men have served in World War I. and not just served, but served on the losing side. They have seen the Treaty of Versailles go into effect. They have watched this runaway inflation happen, and they have all, and especially Murnau, suffered really catastrophic losses.
Does the book have the whole plague storyline?
So, Nosferatu, 1922, for those of us who have not seen it, hinges primarily on Hutter being sent by his possessed boss to a foreign country where he encounters Count Orlok, who is a terrifying demon of some kind. He doesn't know yet, but it's a vampire.
Yes.
While he is there, Orlok sees a portrait of Hutter's wife, Ellen, and becomes fixated on her. Hutter...
Such an important difference.
Yes.
For those of you who have seen the 2024 version and have not seen the 1922 version, deeply different relationship and how it comes to be.
And I really want to talk about the changes they made there specifically.
Because it's a wild difference.
It is a huge difference. But very quick, just to hone in on the World War I of it all for a minute. Count Orlok sees this portrait of Ellen, and after ravishing Hutter...
Leaves him for dead.
And...
departs in his dirt-filled coffin.
Yes.
On a boat called the Demeter.
No, it's not the Demeter.
It is in the version I watched.
It's not. It's not the Demeter.
Interesting.
I think you watched one of the so there are versions floating around that have been like partially re-Draculaized, and one of the things that they did for Americans was change the names back.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in the script, the boat is called...
Oh, in the book, is it the Demeter?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, I feel robbed.
Well, and it's the Demeter again in the 2024 version. But no, in the 1922 version, it has a different name that is like one of Grau's little occult references.
Ah, okay.
The Empusa.
Oh.
It's called the Empusa, which is apparently some kind of occult reference. But where was I?
So the plague piece is...
Yes.
So in the 1922 version, he ravishes Hutter and then he leaves, sort of trapping him inside his castle.
And one of the big things in the 1922 that gets way downplayed in the 2024 and is not present at all in the original is the idea that Nosferatu have to rest during the day in plague dirt, in earth that has been tainted by the dead of the Black Death.
Oh, interesting, because that's not...
It is spelled out depending on which version of the movie you watch.
So the version I watched, it was not plague earth, but it was the earth that he was originally buried in.
In the original script, it is plague dirt.
Interesting.
And that is even more interesting because in Dracula, it's consecrated earth.
The opposite.
It is the exact opposite thing.
Interesting. That would make Willem's like whole consecration scene in the 2024 one sort of irrelevant.
Yes, a little bit. So in the 22 script, you've got these big changes, and what they amount to are a young man being sent by forces that are beyond his control to a foreign land, and then finding out that the blight and the violence that he discovers there has followed him home, and that the cursed soil of that place has now come to taint the soil of his home. And if that's not a fucking war veteran story,
Boy.
I don't know what to tell you.
Boy, not only that, but couple that with the optimism of a young man going into war and I'm doing this for my family and I'm doing this for I have to do this for my wife, my new wife and my family, and it's the right thing to do, and no one would have not my best interests in mind, and then to get there and be oh, no one cares about my interests, and
Yep.
this is a disaster and my life is basically over.
Like, I am going to die alone here
Yes.
in this horrifying place, and then someone is going to go back to my home and kill my wife.
Yes.
What?
Yeah, yeah.
And sort of to round that out, one of the things that I think a lot of people miss, because it can be very hard visually to catch what era things are supposed to be in when they weren't made in our contemporary era, is that between Dracula and Nosferatu 22, there's been a time shift. So Dracula is set essentially when it is released. It's set in like the 1870s. Again, we are peak Victoriana, peak British Empire.
Oh, interesting.
Right?
The movie goes back into the 1830s.
Yes. So Nosferatu 22 is a period piece.
Yes.
And it's set in the Biedermeier period. Do you know anything about the Biedermeier period?
Boy, do I not.
The Biedermeier period, from the perspective of 1922, setting a film in the Biedermeier period is kind of the equivalent of making a movie right now and setting it in the 50s.
Okay.
So the Biedermeier period, it's your post-Napoleonic wars. You are before the first wave of like upsets and revolutions that lead to World War I.
It's the happy days, period.
It is. So what it was in Central Europe specifically, so like Poland, the many nation states that made Germany at the time, I cannot remember when everything was sort of unified under Prussia. Forgive me, German history nerds. But that whole area in Central Europe, it's the Biedermeier period is kind of the catch-all for that time in that area. You've got mass growth in the middle class, and you've got mass growth in sort of mass consumption. And it's an era that's marked by art getting really, really boring and sentimental and kind of lowest common denominator-y, because you're trying to cater to this huge middle class that just want to buy things and don't really want to be challenged or like think particularly hard.
All right.
So the movie is intentionally set in this period of doomed false happiness and lack of controversy. Again, it really is the equivalent of setting something now in the 50s, where you are doing it with the retroactive knowledge of everything that was being hidden underneath that veneer of agreeableness.
Which very much comes through. It's like a very cheery start to the movie.
Yes.
Interestingly enough, I did not find any of that reflected in the 2024 version.
No, and that's the 2024 version has gone so gritty and has gone, I don't know when the 2024 version is supposed to be set. Do we get a year?
It says German, I think 1838 is roughly what I remember the Chiron.
Because it feels Victorian.
It does, and that's why it's interesting that it feels actually probably closer to the time period of Dracula.
Yes.
But the fashions of the 1830s, but the darkness that I would associate with like early like the very beginnings of industrialization and it's definitely like, for what it's worth, Bobby, if you are listening, are you okay? Like, are you good? I'm deeply concerned about you. Like, deeply concerned. But that's neither here nor there, I guess. And again, this all could be very much just stylistic choice in how it's shot, but it's very dark.
It's very, I mean, it's also like literally visually dark.
That's what I mean. Like, it's visually, it is a dark movie.
Another movie added to the list of, gosh, would have enjoyed it a lot more if I could have fucking seen it.
Yeah, it's like the final season of Game of Thrones. It's just moving lumps.
But the other thing that it's important not to overlook in the 22 version that really jumps out when you realize that it is meant to be this kind of period piece that is studiously asking you to kind of wonder what's going on underneath all of these things is the queerness, right? It was created by a gay man in this period in the Weimar Republic where it's not like you could swan about being wildly, flamingly homosexual on the street, but like you kind of could.
All right.
It was definitely as good as it got. It was as good as it had ever been for the gay community of Germany.
Okay.
And Nosferatu himself is this queer figure, right? I mean, he ravishes Hutter, who is useless, by the way. Hutter is this sort of charming,
that remains true through both films.
The phrase I want to use is like all American, but he's this like charming, fresh-faced young man who has no idea what he's getting into.
Yeah, he's a himbo a little bit.
He is ravished in Orlok's castle in his bed. Mm-hmm. And he comes home again to find that his wife is also being ravished. And especially, again, thinking about like the experiences that young men had together away on the front, quietly, behind a shrubbery, down a foxhole, and then coming back and being like, there's some things I know about myself now that I did not.
Here's my wife. Oh, great.
And Nosferatu is this kind of terrifying predator, but also, and this does, I think, carry forward a bit into the 2024. He is a figure that can be read as kind of the embodiment of repressed sexuality. And when
I think that's actually much more apparent in the 2024 one.
Well, yes and no, because I think Nosferatu 22 is an embodiment of repressed sexuality for everyone involved, the men and the women. And Nosferatu 24 seems much more interested in Ellen.
Yeah, Nosferatu 2024 could be like Nosferatu : The Ellen Show.
Yeah.
Like, she went from being a character that's like, I don't want to say not important, but if you looked at like minutes on screen in 2020, in the 1922 version, it's far lower.
The thing that gets me about the 22 version, though, is that she is arguably the most important character and the most interesting character. And that still works without her having to be horrifically abused by the living men in her life.
Yeah, I could have done without. There's a lot I could have done without. But the level of like, we're going to tie this poor young woman down to a bed, exorcism sort of vibes that, okay, one scene I get, but it's like gratuitous. I'm like, okay, how many times?
And that's very Victorian.
Do I have to watch her writhe about?
This was one of the biggest things that really jumped out to me looking at all three versions is it is not until 2024 that anyone is angry with or interested in punishing the women in these books for their own afflictions. In 22 Nosferatu, we have repeated scenes of Ellen who is sleepwalking. She's behaving in ways that confuse people. She has this very interesting sort of psychic connection with Nosferatu that is not initiated until after he sees her portrait. It is very important in the 22 version that everything that happens to Ellen is a direct result of Hutter and Orlok making contact. However, once this psychic connection is made, she saves Hutter by appearing to like call to Orlok through that connection when he is about to outright kill Hutter.
Yep.
And then she has these kind of repeated sleepwalking episodes, but at no point is anyone upset with her. No one punishes her for being ill. No one punishes her for acting strangely. If there is any real emotional vibe to those scenes, it's like, oh no, I'm so sorry, something is wrong with you, like that's terrible, what can I do to help?
There's also no, like, I felt like by the time in the 2024 version, by the end, and the time she like makes the choice that she's gonna sort of like self-sacrifice, it's very much, it was framed to me very much in a way of like, well, of course this is what she should do because all of this is her fault.
Yes.
And like, how could she not? Because like everyone in her life is dying and it's her fault. And I don't know why you, like, there was no need to make that choice.
That is the big change that I have been trying to wrap my head around. Why make Orlok Ellen's fault? Because that's what it is.
They make it.
It is explicitly said that that Orlok is there for her, that he has contrived all of this. Because again, as opposed to Dracula, this has been contrived by Orlok. Orlok has summoned Hutter to him via Canuck in order to come back and prey on this young woman. And
it begs the question all along of like why that was, like, it brings up, in my opinion, it just brought up a lot more questions than gave additional like helpful reference. Like, if it was that contrived, just come over here on your own. Like, why did you need to do this whole like rigmarole? Like,
okay, I have a theory.
Lay it on me.
And I want to be clear, this is like an English major ass theory.
Let's hear it.
In 2024, Count Orlok is the internet.
Oh, wow. Okay. Is that a woman's fault?
Well, I think what we are watching is Ellen, because there's this thing they keep underlining, right? That she invited him in because she was lonely and because she needed connection, and she didn't understand what she was inviting in. And in her big confrontation with her husband, they essentially trade barbs that illustrate that each of them considers themselves a rape victim and each of them considers the other damaged for having been assaulted. And I think that the sort of metaphor we are dealing with here is that they have both gone into this ungovernable place and have been damaged by it, and the different damage that it has wreaked on them has left them forever separated. I think there's a metaphor there for her being like a young woman who went online and made connections that were not good for her and like met people who were not, and I don't think this is a very feminist framework, but I kind of think it's what we're dealing with here, that she either like got into like sex work or was taken advantage of or exposed to things that she thought she was going to be able to let go and live down, but they were always lurking there. And that it is her getting married and thinking that she can live a normal life that brings all of this to the forefront. And that it is this connection that leads her husband into getting sucked into the metaphorical manosphere that is already occupied by his friend who ties her to the bed and abuses her.
Friedrich.
And that ultimately she dies as a consequence of the dark parts of the internet breaking loose into her real life.
Wow.
That's my theory. And I think that's where all of the fucking contract shit comes from, because that is also an addition. That contract thing is not anywhere in any of the source material.
That 3 nights thing. Also, so I don't not like your theory. it also makes me think that, like, okay, so in the 1922 version, there's this, like, Book of the Vampire. So could you potentially also extrapolate a little bit of, like, knowledge? Like, not just the internet, but, like, knowledge in its, or, like, if we were to take it from a very, like, female lens or woman lens of, like, women becoming more learned. Now, the connection's already established, yes, but they do play up the book in the 1922 version, and then the book doesn't exist at all in the 2024 version.
The 22 version, I think the book is partly a byproduct of expressionist cinema, and sort of the layers and, like, texture that they were trying to go for. And it also is an homage to the fact that Dracula is an epistolary novel. Dracula is a combination of letters and diary entries and news articles, beginning to end. Like,
I also could see it as a framing device for a silent film. Like, you need potentially some additional things to be like, you're reading, like, they do it with his letters when he's, like, writing to her from the castle.
So I'm not...
another thing. No, go ahead first.
So I'm not sure, again, I'm not sure about the version that you watched, but apparently some of the versions that are circulating only have, like, 2/3 of the interstitial cards that they're supposed to. And so the effect of the film when it's put back together is way more sort of epistolary. You see a lot more letters and book bits, and it's also very clearly framed as there's a framing device. The interstitial cards are from the perspective of a narrator.
Yes, I got that.
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure. I wasn't sure.
Yes, and there were a decent amount of interstitials, and there was stuff from the book. There was the letters that he writes. There's some of the stuff, I think, from the contract, or maybe like I said, the paper that Canuck has with the instructions. It also is framed and narrated in a, like, sort of a third person, like, as if this was someone who had found out that this was the real reason for the plague.
Yes.
And the troubles.
It's an implied narrative. The whole thing is a book.
Yes, it reminded me of our time with Mary Shelley.
Yes. So the opening page is the title page of the book, which is like the account of the plague by an innkeeper. And so I think the sort of book within a book is very much an homage to the epistolary stuff. But I don't think your instinct is off on the idea of, like, books and knowledge and the consequences of knowledge.
Yeah, the double-edged sword of it all.
But I don't think that the 22 version is interested in being like, gosh, it sure is a problem that woman got a hold of a book.
No, I don't mean it quite like that. I think it's probably the larger just cautionary tale of, like, knowledge in general. And once you know, you can't unknow.
Yeah.
Which all of these men would have very much experienced. All of them in the fuck around and find out era of their lives. Okay, I don't want to, like, transition too much, but I am reminded of another scene that is in the 2024 one that I was like, what the fuck is happening? The scene with the naked virgin on the horse.
Yes.
Any source material on that guy?
No.
Okay. Didn't think so.
Unclear what's happening there.
Unclear, like, what we're even really supposed to take from that scene, other than, like, I took it as he did actually go out and follow them into the woods. This like band of people is, like, their own attempts at, like, warding off a vampire.
So it appears that these Romanians, because the closed captions say specifically that they're speaking Romanian, live in a place where they just have a kind of constant low-level vampire infestation.
Okay.
is what I took from it.
And he was like watching them make sure the vampire was dead?
I think he was watching them kill a vampire that they had recently realized was a vampire. And the woman on the horse, I am assuming, is like a Lady Godiva reference.
Maybe.
And that she is meant to be there to protect them.
Sure. Okay.
It was not totally clear to me.
No. I found that because it made me, in part, there's like a line or there's an interstitial when he's reading the Book of the Vampire, when it talks about like a virgin, like the blood of a virgin who he's like, well, is the only one who can hold him until like the cock crows. And I was like, are they gonna like offer her up? That's where I originally thought the scene was going.
That actually makes good sense. She's there as just in case.
Yeah, she's like,
she's there as backup.
We'll toss her
in case it doesn't work.
We'll toss her at him.
Well, I don't think she has to be tossed.
No, they'll just slap the horse's ass.
It has to. Well, no, I mean, like, she has to be willing. That's the whole thing.
Oh, that's right. That's
Yes.
right.
And again, the 1922 version, she has to be willing. That is outlined.
Yeah, it's in the
source material.
The interstitial. Yeah,
she has to know what she's doing. You can't just sacrifice a woman to him. She has to be willing to do it.
Also, virgins used in the interstitial, that in the version I watched, that it was like a willing virgin blood. And maybe that is because of the version I watched.
My version had it translated as maiden, I think.
Oh, okay.
Not virgin.
Which caused a lot of...
Because Ellen is married.
Correct.
Yes.
And I was like, hold on.
I have read some things about the 22 Nosferatu that speculate that one of the implications is meant to be that Hutter and Ellen haven't actually consummated their marriage. And I do think there's a case to be made for them being in some kind of like a lavender.
Yeah, like a little bit of a bearded situation.
Uh-huh. I think they're both also in the 22 version, especially him, but a little bit her at the beginning. They're portrayed as being kind of childlike.
Yes.
They're very young.
I wrote like ultra naive in my notes.
Yeah, and I think this is partly both of them being sort of crash coursed into the most horrifying parts of adulthood, and one of them gets to survive and one of them doesn't. One of them sacrifices themselves for the other. And weirdly, I don't think Nosferatu 1922 is hugely concerned with gender.
No, I didn't.
In a way that Dracula very much is.
And the 2024 one is.
Yes. 1922, they don't seem that hung up on
who dies, as long as like...
I mean, she has to be, it is very emphatic that it has to be a woman.
Yeah.
But I don't... it doesn't feel to me like the screenwriter and the filmmakers are as preoccupied with like the woman question.
No, and knowing now what we know, I know what you've shared about who they were, that makes more sense.
And I think Ellen in the 1922 version is meant to be a metaphor for the innocence, plural, the many people who are innocent in the sort of suffering country of post-World War I Germany, as much as she is meant to be a person.
Yeah, and I also think there's probably there's a lot of innocent death at wartime.
Yes.
As well.
So that kind of jumps to one of the other big differences that I was struck by between 22 and 24, which is the plague.
Yes.
So in the 22 version, there is an actual plague. The town gets put on quarantine.
Yes.
Everyone is sent back to their homes and locked in, and there's a man going through and putting white chalk crosses on the doors of the households of the afflicted. You are seeing a like substantial real-time body count. In Dracula and in Nosferatu 24, we are not really concerned with anyone except for the people in our immediate vicinity.
Correct. There's like one scene in the 2024 when they're in the hospital and the doctor and the like his like nurse or whatever, he's telling her we can't accept any more patients.
Yeah.
And there's like too many people and she's like, "Oh, what are we going to do with what are they?" That's like kind of it.
Yeah, it's a little blink and you'll miss it.
It also focuses much heavier on the rats.
Yes.
But like not in a way that actually like ties together. The rats ended up feeling very like...
Well, the rats are where the plague comes from.
Well, I mean, I know. I more meant like sometimes the rats are there and they're eating people. Sometimes that's one of those parts of it that I was like, okay, this feels very like gratuitous. You just like wanted scenes of like lots of rats, rats everywhere. But ironically, there's a scene in the 22 version where like when they're on the boat and the rats are on the boat and he like breaks open, not anywhere near that in the 2024 version. They kind of gloss over, I feel like in some ways, the ship part, where I felt like the ship part was like a substantial chunk of time in the 22 version.
So in the novel, The Last Voyage of the Demeter, the chapter that becomes the sort of last voyage of the Demeter, the ship's log, you could read it by itself and it is so effective. It's so moving. It's so tragic. It's beautiful. It is like beautifully done. And I think in the 1922 adaptation, they couldn't resist including it, even though it doesn't really make any sense.
No, and I mean, in the 22 version, I was definitely like, we're really on this boat. Like, we're...
Well, and what's funny is, like, if you think about the geography, why are they on a ship at all?
Well, that was my first question. I was like, wait, he rode a horse here. Why is he suddenly on a boat? And also, where is that boat going?
It's one of those kind of artifacts of the Victoriana version of the story.
At one point, there's like a note about, I can't remember if it's an interstitial in the 22. Yes, it's the captain. Like, it's like log. They're like reading from the book and it's like the Strait of Gibraltar. And I was like, where is this ship going?
One of the things that makes a lot more sense from like a Victoriana perspective is this idea of
that the English love the Navy.
If you are writing from the heart of the British Empire, ships are where dirty foreigners and diseases come from icky mainland Europe and the New World. Just, bleh, ew, boo,
disgusting,
gross.
The only way we could get the plague is from a boat.
And so Dracula arriving in England via a ship is it's not just logistically necessary, it's a very important kind of metaphor for all of these gross foreigners who are going to come.
Just feels like they
ruin our beautiful English empire.
The way they picked and choose like what to include and what to not is just very interesting.
Well, I genuinely think they couldn't resist because it's too good a piece of writing and it's too good a story, especially as a horror set piece.
I mean, good for them. We love standing by our artistic choices.
So in 1922, and anywhere you have ships and ports, disease is a constant worry. And so that makes sense in terms of being like, the plague has arrived and it arrived on a ship.
But then they added this whole other layer in the 2024 by making Friedrich have all of his wealth based in the shipyard.
That's in 22. He's a shipbuilder.
Is he?
Yep.
Oh, okay. I missed that.
It's less important in the
I was going to say, it's
22 version.
It seems very, like, key to him and all of his money that he can't shut up about.
Yeah, no, that's not really important in the 22 version. But he is a shipbuilder. Also, the woman in the 22 version is his sister, not his wife.
Oh.
Yeah.
And so that's why there's no children.
And she's kind of boring, but she's not a bitch.
Their relationship was very weird to me.
Yeah, and it's such a lit down because I think
Was this like real opportunity for like showing like a very like staunch female friendship? And then they like were like, oh, but we want to do that. But JK, no, we don't. But we do. But we don't. And I'm like, okay, well.
So
Okay.
Dracula hinges very heavily on Mina and Lucy's friendship. And it's actually a really lovely portrayal of a meaningful, close female friendship. And I understand why in the 22 version that's kind of been stripped out. It's a very spare film, but also films were shorter back then.
Yes. There's also, I feel like you're very limited in some ways by the manner of the film as well. Like,
yeah,
I think it's really hard to creatively impart some of these more like soft relational things.
Yeah.
When you can't have actual like spoken words.
But it disappointed me that with all of the padding they put back into the story in 2024, that they made the relationship between Anna and Ellen so like antagonistic.
Yeah.
But that kind of depends on what the 2024 Nosferatu is about, because I would venture to say that what we have are three different stories about three completely different things, despite having nominally the same plot three times.
I think that's fair. I got very different things from the two movies.
Yeah. What is this new version? What story is it actually telling? And I think a lot of that comes back to Orlok and like what he is in this narrative, because the other big change to me was him.
Oh, yes.
The original character design of Nosferatu is considered iconic in part because it is unsettling and kind of animalistic, but also alluring in a strange way. It's hard to look away from.
Yeah, he's not like grotesque.
But he is frightening.
He's scary, but in the kind of way that it's like you can't look away from.
Whereas
this
Orlok in 2024 is grotesque, is
yes.
uncomfortable to look at. He's literally rotting. There are holes and pock marks, and it's like decaying flesh. And I don't think it's terribly subtle when you look at the structure of the 2024 film and all of the things with the contract and the sort of Russianness even, that Orlok is very clearly being positioned as a decaying, decadent, flesh-eating, ultra-wealthy predator.
Yeah, just like the creepiest old man.
Yes. Which, in my opinion, kind of feeds back into this reading of Orlok as a representation of a hyper-concentrated dark side of everything that our current class of like tech billionaires have given and taken away from us.
That I think is an easier read. I can go along with that one. I think what I found the most striking about the difference between the two Nosferatus also had to do with how I feel like vampires are traditionally portrayed in general.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think normally there's like, they're very like austere and beautiful and glamorous and like sexy. And especially with this like rise of like monster romance and like, that's a real thing. I'm going to call it Mon-Rom. Sounds like really technical term for like genitalia. But this whole like rise of that like subculture of romance novel is all very much based on this idea that like vampires are beautiful, like so stunningly like beautiful, and like that's part of their like thrall and their allure. And while the version from 1922 is not like beautiful, there is part of that allure, that like you can't look away piece of it. Whereas there was something about the 2024 version where I was like, I don't even want to look at you.
Yeah, I mean, it's grotesque, like it's deeply unsettling.
So disgusting. I was so like taken by how different and how much that changed how I felt about like the storyline as a whole. But then even just at the end, like they still managed to make me feel like this like weird small amount of just like pity.
See,
at the very end, pity might not even be the right word, but just like this version I felt like gave much more to this idea that he felt something for her outside of just like, whereas I feel like the 22 version didn't give me that, and it's possible it's just like shorter and there's less, it's like a sparser story, but it felt much more like the obsession went both ways in 2024.
Yeah,
than it did in the 1922. And I don't know, to your theory, if it's the sort of the double-edged sword of the internet, in that we like love it and hate it, need it but don't want it, are bound to it now, but maybe it's awful for us.
Yeah, I think that fits in very tidily with my reading. I also like, I want to be clear, I'm not entirely sure that this movie knows what it's trying to say.
That I think is also the piece where I like don't want to give them the credit of perhaps this retelling, but who knows?
No, come with me. Enthusiastically sign on to my reading, because I think it's fun. I do think there is that. I think once you make Orlok something that Ellen has invited in and that everyone around her is suffering for, then you have to accept the moral responsibility of that decision falling on her, even if it was something she did because she was lonely. And so unless the story you are trying to tell is about how women will destroy the people around them because they don't understand the forces they're playing with, unless you are trying to go full conservative biblical Eve story, then you have to have some understanding of what Orlok means that puts us as the consumers of your story in a position to fall into the same trap that Ellen has, and understandably.
Yeah, I go along with that.
And so that, combined with the sort of grotesqueness of the character design, which feels much more appropriate in 2024 than in 1922, because now with the advent of social media, we are so much more aware than we have ever been of the absolute ugliness of the people who are ruining our lives. Like, it's so much more tangible, right? You wake up every morning in a world where Elon Musk is destroying people's livelihoods and being the most pathetic mother in the world on the social media platform he bought to make himself feel like he has friends.
All true.
I don't think it was better when we were being oppressed by like royalty, but at least they were physically far away from you and had fancy outfits, and you never got close enough to know that they made shitty jokes and smelled bad.
No, I mean, isn't that truly like, that is the worst of the advent of the internet is that it's like taken the blinders off of humankind.
Yeah, we're being eaten alive by something that we are addicted to.
Well, and also just you can't pretend to not know anymore.
Yes.
And that's the crux of it, is that I think like...
And we can't pretend to not know because we're addicted to it.
Well, yeah, and I mean, in 1980, you could maybe think, oh, maybe my neighbor's a little bit racist, but you'd never know.
You wouldn't have to know.
You wouldn't have to know. And now, you log into Facebook, and they've posted some insane, like, Tea Party QAnon theory, and now you know, and you can't unknow. This is the devil's deal.
And every day that we spend trying to figure it out, these people get richer because we are also directly enriching them with our engagement every day.
Correct.
So my conclusion personally is that Nosferatu 2024 is unsettling, but ultimately not unsuccessful. Although I think there is a world in which it could have been done much more tidily, because one of my concerns with the 24 version is that it is equally open to the interpretation that Ellen is gross and icky and her sexuality has doomed us all.
Yeah.
I think a movie that had a clearer idea of its own ideas would not have left that quite so ambiguous.
I think very fair. And I think that's why that particular storyline gives me as much pause, because I feel like as the filmmaker, it's your responsibility to make it clearer.
And it's the same ambiguity from The Witch. The Vivivitch.
Which I never saw.
It's a very good movie that I like very much. That is a very neat little metaphor for religious fundamentalism that kind of falls apart in the third act when the witches are real and actually eating babies, which undermines
the first two acts.
Cool. So this might be a little bit of a Robert Eggers special, which is fumbling the landing after, like, trying to make movies that are these kind of like feminine anti-hero parables that kind of fail to stick the landing, leaving people like me to just make up our own ideas of what the story is about.
To go theory wild.
And I maintain that this movie is about tech billionaires, the manosphere, and the fact that consuming pornography and sex work in general are not actually dangerous unless you are surrounded by people who are intent upon punishing you for it.
I don't think you're wrong. I want to be very clear.
That's my takeaway. That's the movie I'm choosing to have seen.
I'm down with that. And to be very fair, I didn't like dislike the movie. It just was a movie that I was like, okay, I probably don't need to watch this again.
Yeah,
just
fair.
From like a personal joy meter.
Yeah, that's fair.
I do want to talk about Willem.
My baby boy?
Yeah.
My sweet angel?
Yeah. And just like...
probably the highlight of the film.
The only reason I would watch it again.
Yeah.
Only reason is him as like a disgraced doctor who's taken a turn towards occult research. Now,
interestingly, and I honestly think that this is why he is such a standout. As you know, as our listeners may not know, Willem Dafoe is not from the 2022 Nosferatu. Willem Dafoe is straight up just Van Helsing yoinked out of the Dracula novel and dropped back into Nosferatu. and it's better for it.
Well, Van Helsing appears in the 2020 or the 1922 version very briefly.
Where?
Maybe they don't. Maybe this is a difference in version, and my interstitials called him this, but yours did not. But there's like a professor. There's a scene with a Venus flytrap.
Dr. Bulwer. That is not Van Helsing.
My interstitials called him Van Helsing.
That was a lie. They lied to you.
And
because
I wrote...
Van Helsing in the book is so sweet. He's like charming and energetic and deeply, deeply comforting. Like, one of the nicest things about him as a character is every time he's on the page, you just feel like you're being hugged. And Dr. Bulwer is completely useless and might as well not be there.
Well, so I definitely wrote in my notes, Van Helsing ... who is not Hugh Jackman, which was a Little Muppet Christmas Carol joke just for me. But I was just like, wait, this like elderly man is supposed to be Van Helsing? I was so confused.
That is very much the Dr. Bulwer in the 1922. Again, we're looking at a parable of like post-World War I Weimar Republic. Like, one of the points that they, I think, are going out of their way to make is that in this universe, in this story, there are no charming old wizened academics coming to rescue you. The medical profession is as baffled and useless as everyone else. The only thing that can save them is Ellen. Contrast that with 24. We have lifted Van Helsing up out of Dracula and just brought him along for the ride, and thank God, I love him so much.
Yeah, he was a real highlight of the film for me.
Yeah.
The film got significantly better for me once he showed up. Also because he ended up just being like this, like a nice foible to like how gross Friedrich ended up being.
Yes.
And like how aggressive he was. He was like it was a balance of energy that I like very much needed. That I was just like, oh, thank God. But they don't call him Van Helsing in the movie, right?
No.
They give him some other name.
They call him von Franz.
Okay.
But he is very much Van Helsing.
Okay.
Like, everything about the character is Van Helsing, down to the idea that he's like a sort of renowned expert on diseases of the brain who also has kind of lost some of his reputation because he's wandered into the occult. Mm-hmm. That is Van Helsing's backstory. That's his whole thing.
Gotcha.
Which is why he is uniquely positioned to diagnose what ails Lucy and to try and save her, but fail. But then he saves Mina. And I will say, to loop back around to giving 2024 a little bit of credit, I think from when Willem Dafoe comes on the screen, there is, between him and Ellen, a sudden kind of moral clarity that the rest of the movie lacks. The minute he is there to understand her, and she feels understood by him, they are kind of operating on a different level, and he is the one who like sees and acknowledges and enables the sacrifice that she is going to make.
The age-old tale that a woman alone can't be true, but when a man comes along and says, no, you're right, then all of a sudden she's right.
I think one of the redeeming features of the sort of storyline in a general sense is that Ellen does what she does, knowing even up to the end that none of them still really believe her. And Willem Dafoe's character, von Franz, enables her to make her sacrifice by deceiving the rest of them.
Yes, I found that like lovely scene where she walks him to his door. They're like all together and she's like, I'll walk you to... And they kind of come to their understanding together. And I was like, this is nice.
Yeah.
I'm glad you have someone.
Yeah. I think, and this is a conclusion I have drawn since we started talking about it, but I think that this is a complicated and I don't know how successful attempt at really blending Nosferatu 22 and Dracula. The more we have picked through it, the more elements I'm kind of tracing back to the novel rather than the intermediary film. And I was I think tricked a little bit because the plot is so like thoroughly 22 Nosferatu, but the third there are elements, the medicalization, the larger role of Dr. Seward, Van Helsing himself.
Part of me wonders, like, would it have been better for him to just make a film adaptation of Dracula as opposed to trying to, like, take this movie that very clearly made some choices to not be a one-for-one adaptation.
Yeah.
But then still try to, like, wedge back in some of this source material. But then you're left with this thing that does feel at points like sort of clunky or like a little bit disjointed, because especially if you've watched the 1922 version of Nosferatu as himself is like such a quintessential horror archetype, like visual.
Yeah.
That I understand the need to be like, I gotta really do something different to like separate myself from this. And apparently that means like making Bill Skarsgård just like look like a walking corpse, but also a huge, terrifying walking corpse.
Well, and that's
how do you have parts of your back with no skin, but you maintain that much of a mustache? I had some like logistical questions.
I gotta say, like, Nosferatu 22, the villain really is death, right? Like, Nosferatu himself is death. And yes, there's a very engaging and worthwhile reading of additional things that Orlok can mean, but Orlok is death, right? I mean, you look at the character design and like that is...
Yeah, he's like the pallor.
That is a corpse, an aristocratic corpse.
Yes.
Which feels very fitting for a post-war horror narrative. 24 Nosferatu is decay, not death.
Which is, yeah, they're very different.
Decay. And that does feel very appropriate for a traumatized, collapsing empire. Maybe that's what it is we've got a narrative that is the peak of empire, where the only thing that could threaten us is coming from without. And if we band together, we beautiful, happy white men, we can defeat it. We've got a story from the aftermath of an empire, which is everyone I love is going to die. And I have been so immersed in death that I don't know if I will ever be able to live again. And now we've got the Nosferatu Dracula from a world that is suspended in a state of what feels like perpetual decay. And here it is.
Here we are.
2024
Nosferatu, the Nosferatu we deserve.
Fingering Daddy Orlok's back holes as he murders us.
I was
like, her finger's about to go in that hole.
It was so close to that hole.
Oh, here it goes. And then she just got into it.
She also like made out with him with a level of perceived fervor that all I could think was the smell.
That's how you gotta keep his attention till the sun comes up, baby.
No, I mean, I know. Great actress. Like, we're doing it.
One important note. Dracula being killed by sunlight was an invention of the 1922 Nosferatu.
Interesting. Also, he bursts into flames in the 22 version, and in this one, he just sort of, like, mummifies.
Yeah.
I guess had to get that, like, really crazy shot of her naked, covered in blood with his, like, crypt-like Skeletor body on top.
Yeah.
And flowers sort of around. Thanks, Willem.
That's also a reference to the novel. And how successful it is, I think, like we've been saying, really depends on what you think it's saying.
I think that, for me, part of the reason that I didn't find it more terrifying in any kind of way was that it was a period piece.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why, but for some reason that like immediately like disarms.
Yeah, fair
As
enough.
if scary things didn't happen in the past. Like that's the stupidest thing my brain's ever come up with, but that's okay.
I mean, my favorite horror movies are period piece horror movies. I just love them for some reason. Maybe because I find good horror to be incompatible with iPhones. The minute you have a smartphone in a horror story of any kind, it's just, you have to spend at least a solid chunk of the beginning dispensing with the cell phone, and I get annoyed by it.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair.
But,
I don't know. Go watch them.
yeah.
Read the book.
Dracula, having reread it now recently for the first time in quite a while, Dracula slaps. It's so fun, and it's so compulsively readable, especially because of the epistolary nature of it. The first little bit kind of drags. Getting Jonathan Harker to Dracula's castle, you're in his travel log, and Bram Stoker is a little too excited to show off all the Transylvania research he did. But from when you are in that castle, it is a galloping read. It's so good. It's so fun.
All right, so go read Dracula, everyone.
Yeah, go read Dracula. Watch the 1922 version. Try to watch. So I have heard people say that the frame rates are a mess, but the Kino version appears to be the most complete version that I could easily find here in the United States, that has the correct like interstitials and has all of the scenes correctly assembled, and the original tinting is correct, which is very important because that's what lets you know if it is daytime or nighttime or twilight.
Yes, that's very difficult to do in a black and white film.
Correct. And the tinting is how it would have been originally presented. So, yeah, the Kino version.
And then obviously the new version.
We don't need to tell you to watch 2024 Dracula. Or
I kind of wish it were 2024 Dracula.
we don't need to tell you to watch 2024 Nosferatu. You either already have or already want to or don't intend to.
Or you will not. So
we won't make a difference.
Whichever camp you're in, that's okay.
But now you know a little bit more about its influences and the things that it is building on. So isn't that fun?
Look, a little break from a gulag. What a thing to come out of gulag-related episodes about.
All right. Well, Maddie.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This was fun.
Yeah.
I hope you had a good time. We honestly, we were much more serious than I expected. We were very academic.
We were, and that's normally not our speed at all. It was actually a little bit jarring.
I'm really surprised at the lack of
giggles.
Yeah, and raunchy jokes.
So you're welcome, everyone.
Is there anywhere you would like people to find you?
I'd like people to follow Didn't Read It on Instagram or Blue Sky, our new channel.
Yeah. All right. Follow
the pod.
You heard the lady. And
follow the pod.
Follow the pod. Check out our new merch store. There's fun stuff there.
Oh yeah.
And it will help me keep making this beautiful show.
Deeply important.
And yeah, other than that, we'll be back next week with more rip-roaring adventures. I think it's gonna be some Raymond Carver.
Ooh.
Yeah. Gonna get a little saucy.
That's fun.
With some dames.
Resurrecting American short stories.
And as always, if you can, this week, this month, this pay period, consider supporting a living author, because they could really, really use the love. Bye. Bye. Didn't Read It was created, written, researched, and recorded by me, Grace Todd. Maddie Wood is our co-producer and social media maven. Editing by Tally, a true podcasting professional, and Grace Todd. Our theme song is Books 2.0, written, performed, and recorded by William Albritton. Our logo was designed and illustrated by the incredibly talented Jess Versus. Special thanks to Black Iris Social Club in Richmond, Virginia. Reach out to us with questions, concerns, or academic scrutiny at didntreaditpod@gmail.com.